This happened a couple of years ago, early on in my relationship with my husband. He was a bit of a partier. He didn't have too much regard for other people's needs, nor their safety if their needs somehow got in front of his wants. If we were out at a club, and I worked the next morning, he would become furious if I made him leave early, and early being 2 a.m. Luckily, he has since grown as a human, and finally has a sense of decency about him. And I think this event may be why. The night this happened, we had visited with a couple close friends of his at a club in Chicago. I had just started a new medication, so I wasn't sure how alcohol would interact with it, and I chose not to drink. He, on the other hand, decided to do ecstasy. Totally fine by me. I was designated driver, so he could do what he wanted. A little into the night, my partner and I sat down, and a young lady sat beside him. She was foreign, and I noticed she was more touchy than American women were. This didn't bother me at first. I've never been the jealous type. She was being silly and had her hand on his knee, moving closer to, This began making me uncomfortable because I noticed he wasn't saying anything. And me being overly polite, I didn't want to cause drama, so I also said nothing. I didn't know how to respond to such a situation. I looked up near the bar and sighed out of frustration, but kept a positive expression. And this is when I noticed him, a young man in his 20s, wearing a white shirt with black dots. He was sitting in the chair, his body pointed straight toward me. He had a blank stare as he watched me, and I immediately felt the vibe and felt unsafe. My gut told me he was staring way too intently at me, and it wasn't normal. Back to my husband, the young lady got up and left. I mentioned that if a man sat next to me and put his hand near my crotch, he would have most likely decked him. I said it was unfair to make me feel so awkward in a situation like that. And in the future to please be more aware because, being well-natured, I'm not one to create fights with strangers over silly things. Being a bit under the influence, he took this as me being jealous and controlling him, of course. His response was a not-so-nice dismissal of what I said. Frustration growing, I glanced up and sitting across from me was the guy. He was still staring at me, reading the situation. Becoming angry and feeling strange because of this guy, I asked my husband if we could relocate. He had to use the bathroom, so up we went. I stood alone at another bar in the club and waited for him to return. Looking around, and who do I see? Of course, that dude was now at this bar, staring with zero expression. I began to have a sinking feeling in my gut because he was just not normal. I subtly gave him the "can I help you" expression, but looked away before I could see his reply. Once my partner returned, I calmly asked him the chances we would call it a night. It was nearing 1 a.m. and I had to work in the morning. I knew this would cause some type of drama, and it did. He immediately thought I had wanted to leave due to my jealousy issue. This was not the case at all. Inside, I truly felt unsafe, but refused to say anything because I knew my partner might fly off the handle with this dude. Had I misread the body language of the dude, my mistake could lead to him being hurt. I glanced, and he was still staring, so I asked to relocate again. We did, and my boyfriend was becoming more and more intoxicated. His body language was more and more irritated by me. Finally, I was feeling horrible, between a rock and a hard place. Here was the man who I felt needed to protect me, and yet he stood before me making me feel terrible. No matter where in the club we went, I noticed the dude with the dotted shirt. He would get closer and closer to us, watching the tension between my partner and I. Finally, I threw in the towel. I said screw it and decided to go. Like an idiot, I decided to leave the club and walk to my car alone. It was around 3 a.m. now, and I was just mentally drained. The guy who followed me around inside the club wasn't in my mind as I walked outside. Leaning up against the building, I looked at my phone to route how to walk back to my car. 15-minute walk in high-heeled boots. Great, I thought. I looked up to start my journey, and wouldn't you know it, across maybe 10 feet from me was this dude. He leaned against the light pole, staring and grinning. Without a single word, I immediately walked back to get into the club. I was stopped and told I couldn't re-enter. I looked at the bouncer with my pointing eyes and said, "That guy's been following me. My partners in the club, please let me back in. I don't feel safe." Thankfully, they allowed me back in. I found my partner and just about freaked out at him. My politeness was gone. And I began venting about what I was going through, about how he was willing to let me walk to my car alone because he wanted to party. I told him how selfish this was, how I could have been attacked. To my amazement, he hugged me and apologized profusely. Luckily, he grew up that night and life has since been good. My dad grew up on a forestry in Queensland, Australia, as the son of a forest ranger. My whole life, we've spent a lot of time out in that forest, camping and driving through parts of the forestry that only rangers would travel, and only occasionally. One place that Dad loved to take us was a little farm in the middle of the forest that was impossible to find if you didn't know the way. Locals knew the place as Spike's Hut. Spike was a local farmer who had lived there for decades up until the 90s, and had a reputation for being abrasive, violent, bigoted, and not concerned with the laws of men. He had a habit of approaching guys in bars who were wearing earrings and tearing them straight out. And there were a few stories about people who displeased him and disappearing. Basically, Spike was not a nice guy, and his farm and hut reflected that pretty well. Dad would take us out there every time we visited the forest, and the hut would be more and more dilapidated, but the vibe was always the same. That straight-up feeling of just being watched, even though Spike was long gone. As I got older, I became more aware of the signs of life in the place when we went to visit. There would be 44-gallon drums full of smashed beer bottles, fire pits with reasonably fresh coal. Someone was definitely out there. God knows why, since the place was literally a snake pit at that point, but Dad didn't seem concerned. One trip when I was a teenager got strange really quick. My friend and I were all piled into my dad's 4x4, and we were driving through the bush to Spike's so Dad could tell his scary Spike story and freak us out. We drove onto the property and something immediately caught my eye. Up on the hill opposite Spike's hut, there was what appeared to be a cowboy slumped against a log, hat over his face and taking a nap. Something about his body position looked unnatural and uncomfortable. It wasn't the way you'd be sat if you were taking a casual nap in the middle of a workday. And even if it was, there was no reason for anyone to be out there. The farm was long defunct, and there was no forest business to be taken care of on the property. I pointed it out to my dad, and instead of letting us out of the car at Spike's, as he usually did, he said he wanted to keep driving through the farm to show us something. He maintained that it was nothing, but that if the figure was still there when we came back, we'd stop and check it out. Of course, whatever he wanted to show us seemed totally made up as he just drove through the forest a bit. And when we came back, I spotted the slumped over cowboy again, never having moved an inch. Still in that same unnatural position. I yelled out to Dad to stop, reminding him of his promise, but instead he acted like he couldn't hear me, locked the truck doors, and drove off the farm much faster than he ever drove on those dirt forest roads. My friends and I all looked at each other in confusion, but we knew that when it came to this area, questioning my dad was futile at best, dangerous at worst. Dad denied that any of the events that day ever happened after that, but my friends and I were still curious about what was going on out there, so a few months later we went camping on our own and set out to find Spike's hut. It took hours of driving through the forest to find the gate to Spike's property, but eventually we found it without Dad's help. Something was off once we got there, more so than usual that day though. My mates jumped out of the car but were suddenly frozen, not wanting to walk any closer to the hut, for no visible reason. The vibe was just wrong that day, and it felt like we had walked into something that did not belong to us. The tug in my gut to get out was strong, but I'd spent 2 hours finding the place, and I was gonna explore it, damn it. One of my friends acted brave and walked from the car to the hut with me, quietly acknowledging more and more signs of inhabitants with knowing nods between us. We said nothing to the others, but we were on high alert. It felt like someone could be back any minute, or that they had never left and were watching us as we poked around the debris. We walked up to the side of the hut to find a kind of small shed with 3 walls. I heard my friend's voice go squeaky as he called me over to look inside. On the ground was a huge pile of ashes from what looked like a cooking fire, and confirming this was the presence of a giant makeshift grill made from cross-hatched wire sitting over the fire, hinged to the shed wall. As I'm looking at this setup, I figure that whoever has been here has been hunting and cooking large chunks of their kill over the fire. Pretty clever, actually, but then my stomach dropped. As my eyes traveled from the grill to the ground, I saw a baby's sock. Tiny, pink, and terribly out of place, and then another, then a shirt, then a ribbon from a child's hair. All of this sitting right beside the ashes on the ground, next to a women's weekly Christmas cookbook. That's when the alarm bells in my head went off, and I rounded up my mates to get out of there. Some ranger or crazy old bushy hanging out at that trashed hut was one thing, but there was absolutely no reason for a baby to be out there. And there's no way anything good had come of having a child's clothes right by a huge fire and grill. When we got back to the campground, we couldn't shake the rotten feeling of being watched, and all of us were so unsettled that we just packed up our shit and decided not to stay the night. When I got home, I told my dad about it, and he just shook it off, saying weird stuff happens out there. Being young and dumb, I never thought to look up missing persons in the area in an attempt to either explain the cowboy or the kid's clothing. But I can tell you that I will never make the mistake of going out to Spike's without my father, ever again. Since the moment I started working at this restaurant 6 months ago, the alleyway behind the restaurant has always given me an uncomfortable feeling. To gain a layout of this restaurant, it's located in the middle of downtown, 5 minutes from the Mexican-United States border, since we're located in the tip of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. The alley itself is not located right behind the establishment. You must walk past its patio, then past our garage until you reach the side back door that you have to prop open, as the door locks behind you once it's closed. During the day, I'll usually see people walking back and forth across the alley when I go to take out the trash. It's typically a safe location, though it is also prominent for its homeless population. They're usually harmless, despite a few that are noticeably mentally ill. My colleagues have even gotten to know a few and have given leftovers whenever possible. I work as a part of the kitchen staff at this restaurant, and most of the time will work past 10 p.m. At night, my boss usually never lets the women take out the trash just to be safe, especially a petite 5-foot Hispanic 28-year-old female. Anyway, since the quarantine started, our kitchen staff has become quite small, so I'll usually help take out the trash with one of the other men working. This night was pretty slow, and my fellow coworkers and I were encouraged to clean up and leave early. At around 9:45, I decided to get 2 of the slightly full trash bags and take them out back myself, assuming someone will see my actions and take the other 2 after me. As I walked past the patio to the garage, my gut began to fluster. I got to the back door and paused. Maybe you should wait, I told myself, but the smell protruding from the bags was nauseating. I pushed the door open and propped it open with a brick we usually kept nearby. The alley was dark and silent, the air felt menacing. The only light illuminating was from the bulb above the door. I walked quickly to the bins and lifted up the top and dumped the trash. Then, slowly, a man stood up from the other side of the dumpster. He wasn't very big, but he looked a lot older. He was sweating, but his demeanor seemed agitated. He must have been crouching and waiting for some time. I jumped back, holding my hand above my heart and seemed to be pulsing through my chest. The man looked at me, eyeing me as my steps moved backwards. He shook his head, motioning for me to stop. He was far too close for me to outrun him. I looked at his bushy dark brows and dark black eyes. Most of him was still cloaked in the night that surrounded us. His clothes did not look homeless, but I still assumed he was, since it was common for them to be out here at this hour, usually waiting for food. I told him I didn't have any leftovers, but he shook his head again and took out a medium-sized knife. My eyes widened as I took in a breath. The following exchange took place in Spanish, but I'll translate it. "I don't have my purse. I was working. I'm still working." "Just come with me," he said, using his knife as a pointer. My mouth grimaced, having no idea where this small amount of courage came from. I said, "My friend is coming right now with the rest of the trash." "No, come now," he said more hurriedly, and stepped closer. I stepped back again. Speaking again with a little more tenacity, "They all saw me come over here. There's more trash, and he's coming right now. He's outside right now. I just need to yell." "You are not going to scream or I'll gut you." To this day, I don't know what came over me, but I replied with, "Watch me." We looked at each other, daring each other, and then we both heard footsteps coming from inside the garage, and he ran past me. I stood there, breathing again. I didn't even know I was holding my breath. I turned to see my friend John come out the door. "Hey, we're almost done over..." He stopped after seeing my face. "What happened?" I explained everything as tears ran down my cheeks. My friend decided to run down the alley and try to catch him, even though I told him not to, and that he was gone by then. It was about 5 minutes until he came back. John relayed to me that no one was around except for some homeless guys we were familiar with. He asked them if they saw anyone running from the alleyway, and they said yeah, but they didn't recognize the man, and he took off in the opposite direction towards the border. John took me back inside and told our boss what happened. They called the cops, whose station was pretty close by. They sent someone to patrol the area and gather a description for me, which I gave. My boss let me leave early, and John walked me to my car. He told me it's too bad we don't keep a camera back there. It would have been cool to see how I handled the guy. I had smiled slightly, but my stomach was still in knots. He looked at me and apologized. I moved my hand to stop him and told him I'd be fine. Unfortunately, I still work there, but I've been excused from trash duty from now on. Obviously, they never found him. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if I was more complicit. Something gave me the courage to argue back to him, and thank goodness that my friend came just in time, so... Man that was waiting behind the dumpster, I hope we never meet again. When I was a junior in college, I went camping with 4 friends in Bald Eagle State Park in Pennsylvania. We had reserved a campsite that was pretty remote and pretty deep in the park, way up on one of the mountains, not near any of the other campsites. It was located at the end of a narrow dirt road, maybe about 75 feet long, which itself broke off from the main road, which I think was also dirt. There was nothing at the end of the little road but our campsite. We parked at the entrance to the park and spent the day hiking up to the site, setting up camp and then hiking around. We made a fire, made dinner, and then we turned in. Not long after, we discovered that one of the guys with us snored. Loudly. Like walls of the tent shaking snores. Truly deafening stuff. After probably half an hour or so, the rest of us gave up on trying to sleep and climbed out of our tents, leaving our loud friend snoring away in his. My friend at the time was a DJ for our school's radio station, and she had a late night show. I think she was on between midnight and 2 a.m. Since we couldn't sleep, we trekked up to the main road where the reception was better and where we could actually be able to hear the radio over his snores. And when we got to the road, We stood in a loose circle near the entrance to our site. As we stood there, a black pickup truck with its lights off appeared out of the woods and passed us. Very slowly. It was unmarked, not a ranger. We listened to the radio for maybe half an hour or 45 minutes after that, and even briefly called in to say hi. And finally, though, we decided to head back to bed. One of the girls went off into the woods to take care of some things, while I climbed back into the tent that I shared with her and got into my bag. After a couple of minutes, I heard her moving through the leaves toward the tent, coming from my right. At the same time, I also heard the unmistakable rumble of tires on the ground. I stood up and looked out of the little screen window on the tent. We hadn't bothered to put the rain fly up, as it was a perfectly clear night with a very bright moon, so I could see everything. I saw my friend come sprinting back to the tent and duck behind it just as the black truck pulls into our campsite, still with its headlights off, and then it shuts off the engine and just sits there. Our friend is still snoring. I have a little knife in my tent, and I know my other two friends have at least one in theirs, but we have no other weapons, no guns or bear spray. So we just watch. As I said, it's a clear night, and I can see the truck just fine. It's maybe 20 feet away from my tent, but I can't see who's in the truck, or how many people there are. Nothing seems to move inside the truck. I still remember the metallic clunk sound as the engine cools off. I honestly have no idea how long I just watched it. My friend had ducked down behind our tent, and I could hear by her breathing that she was terrified, but neither of us said a word. It feels like a really long time had gone by. It had to be at least 10 minutes, but it could have been half an hour or more. We just kept waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, the truck started up again and then backed up down the long, narrow dirt road. It never turned its headlights on, and I heard it drive back in the direction it had originally come from, and that was it. My friend burst into the tent a second later, and now we're talking, "Did you see that? Holy shit! Oh my god!" But our friend is still asleep. Eventually, we just went to bed. We packed up and headed out in the morning as we planned, and yes, we checked with the park, and they do not own any black unmarked SUVs, nor did any ranger come to check out our site in the middle of the night. Hey there, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed this collection of terrifying true encounters. Just terrifying true stories, really. Just got some good true horror stories for y'all to listen to. Hang on. Hey, Google. Give me a nickname.
Would you like me to give you a special nickname?
Yes.
Excellent. Would you like a short one or a fancy one?
Short.
Got it. Something short that might look good as a tattoo. How about waffles?
All right.
God,
so
that's a good one.
I was talking.
Everything you've ever wanted.
You can stop talking. Stop talking.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right, friends. So this is Waffles. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. This creepy encounters, terrifying. If you did enjoy it and would like content that is kind of similar to this, but also not similar to this, please consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button and the bell icon next to it. Also, we hit 1,000 subscribers, so that's freaking awesome. Anyway, yeah. You can support the growth of Nevermore by following me on Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, or supporting me through Ko-fi or Patreon. All these optional, and every one of them greatly appreciated. Thank you to everyone that got me to 1K subs. I'll save the sappy thank yous for any sort of special that I do for that, which I have to, apparently. Yeah, hope you all have a fantastic day and a lovely weekend. Had a lovely weekend, and just have a great week next week. Till then, I'll see you on the next video, but until then, sleep well.